Here at the State Archives, we also have mental health records. And here we can see a digital image of one of these documents. The State Archives holds records from some hospitals operated by the government of the state of California, including Agnews, DeWitt, Mendocino, Modesto, Sonoma, and Stockton State Hospitals. Here we can see the Stockton State Hospital register entry for Reuben Clark, the state capitol's architect. Clark was committed to the Stockton State Hospital for, quote, violent bursts of passion, unquote, that threatened his family, which were caused by, quote, too close attention to the building of the state capitol, unquote. Clark died of general paralysis on July 4th, 1866. There are some patient indexes available for these hospital records, and we will search the indexes for the years we have, but patrons must specify a hospital and roughly a 5-year parameter for their stay. Furthermore, we must abide by all state and federal laws regulating the access to medical information. In other words, some of the records that we have here at the State Archives are exempt from public disclosure or under state or federal law. We also have here at the Archives petitions to the legislature. Some of our earliest records here at the State Archives include petitions to the legislature, and these petitions are arranged chronologically and are rather poorly described. But they do contain some early references to African Americans during the gold rush. Here we can see a scanned image of a petition from 1852 by Southern plantation owners who were requesting permission to, quote, colonize a rural district with at least 2,000 African domestics. They will bring with them the agricultural skill and experience in the cultivation of cotton, rice, and sugar, with all of the appliances necessary to prepare those productions for market, unquote. Here we can see another digital scan of another petition to the legislature. In that same year, 1852, this other petition was submitted to the legislature, actually advocating for an increase in the rights of African Americans in California. At that time, African Americans could not testify against white people in courts of law. According to the petitioners, quote, this provision of the statute in effect denies to all such colored persons the protection of the law in enjoyment of the rights or property and personal security, and the vicious and unprincipled take advantage of this disability and prey upon those rights with impunity, unquote. So let's do this. Let's relocate now. Let's go into our stacks area. I mentioned that earlier. Let's actually go in there and take a look and see what that part of the building looks like. So why don't you follow me? Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are now in our behind-the-scenes part of the State Archives. These are the stacks. This is where we store a lot of our historic records. Most members of the public never get to see this part of the building. As you see, we have some shelving units here with some bound volumes being stored, just ready and willing for a member of the public to come in and request them and ask to look at the information they contain. So continuing on our discussion about some of the records we have here that are most helpful for family history research, we do have also a lot of military records. We have records of the California State Militia and the California National Guard that cover the years roughly about 1850 to 1940. And it includes a wealth of information about thousands of different Californians who served the state in various capacities. These records are, for the most part, there are no name indexes. We do have some name indexes with these records. We have name indexes that relate to members of the state militia from the 1850s, 1851 to 1866. We have some name indexes for those individuals who served in California military units during the American Civil War. So that name index covers 1861 to 1867. We also have name indexes for California soldiers who served during the Spanish-American War in 1898. In fact, let's take a look now at one of the historic documents we have from our military collection. This is an image of a muster roll from an organization, a militia unit called the Los Angeles Mounted Rifles. And this militia unit was supposedly the only militia unit from a non-slave state that defected and fought on the Confederate side during the American Civil War. And many of the records we do have here at the archives, military records, do include muster rolls, which sometimes researchers can find the name of an ancestor on those documents. For the most part, the military records we have do not contain name indexes. So in order to access those, most of those records are arranged by the name of the militia unit or the designation of the California National Guard unit. So if a person knows the name of the military unit that their ancestor served in, we might be able to then pull the appropriate records. We also have very many prison records here at the California State Archives. We have prison records that date from the early 1850s that go all the way until the late 1980s. Here we can see some of the inmate mugshot photographs that we have here at the California State Archives. We only have information from state prisons at the archives. We don't have federal, county, or municipal prison records or jail records. Depending upon the time period, the information that is required to access our prison records include the inmate's name, his or her inmate identification number, or the date they were discharged from prison. For records pre-1950 or so, we have two different name indexes. One name index for San Quentin state prisoners and one name index for Folsom state prisoners. For prison records after 1950, our records after 1950, searching by inmate name is a little bit more problematic since those indexes leave something to be desired. Once an inmate identification number and a date of discharge have been discovered, however, the types of prison records that might be found include a mugshot photograph, an entry in an inmate register, inmate case files, commitment papers, applications for pardon, executive clemency case files, extradition case files, and execution case files if the individual is put to death by the state authorities. Inmate case files tend to contain the most information, but pre-1950 case files were heavily sampled, which means only a proportion were kept and the majority of them were destroyed in accordance with state law. And it's not unusual for our staff to only be able to find a single mugshot photograph and a one-line entry in a prison register for researchers, which is sometimes unfortunate because a lot of our researchers might be interested in obtaining more information than what we have in our facility. We do have a large volume of inmate case files from the late 1950s until the late 1980s. In order to access those, a discharge date is almost always required to find the information. And that's also the time period for which our name indexes are the weakest, in my opinion. And we also have some early records from the California Youth Authority that are also heavily used by our family history researchers here at the State Archives. These include registers and some case files for the Fred C. Nellis School for Boys. That was down in Whittier, California, from about 1891 to 1948. We also have records for the Ventura School for Girls. Those records are from about 1909 to 1963. And also the Preston School of Industry from about 1894 to 1914. And there's quite a few name indexes available for those records dated through 1930. Here we can see actually an image of one of the registers from the California Youth Authority. And this next image actually shows a page from the register including a mugshot photograph of the child in question. Of course, we have to follow all state and federal laws governing access to personal information. So there are many prison records for which are exempt from public disclosure and cannot be viewed. We also have a large volume of court records here at the State Archives that can sometimes be helpful for family history researchers. We have case files from the California Supreme Court and the California Courts of Appeal. We have over 6,600 cubic feet of case files from the Supreme Court of California. Those date from about 1850 till about 2017. And we have over 20,000 cubic feet of case files from the Courts of Appeal that date from about 1905 till about 2011 or so. And as the repository for the historic records of state-level government, we don't generally have county-level records such as Superior Court records. The case files we have may include briefs, transcripts, opinions. Here we can see an image of arguably the most unusual Supreme Court document in the collection of the State Archives. It's a writ of habeas corpus signed by William H. Beatty, who was the 15th Chief Justice of California. It was signed on behalf of David S. Terry, who is the 4th Chief Justice of California, who was then sitting in an Alameda County jail for assaulting a U.S. Marshal in 1888 in a San Francisco federal courtroom. Here we can see an image of the case file from the Supreme Court in re Perkins. This case file brings to life the struggles that some Black Californians faced after passage of California's Fugitive Slave Act of 1852. Here we can see the opinion written by Chief Justice Hugh Murray in regards to the Perkins case. The petitioners in the case were 3 men, Carter Perkins, Robert Perkins, and Sandy Jones, who came to California along with the slave owner, C.S. Perkins, from Mississippi. This was before the adoption of the state constitution in 1849. According to that constitution, Article 1, Section 18 declared that, quote, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, unless for punishment of crime, shall ever be tolerated in this state, unquote. Now, C.S. Perkins returned to Mississippi, and at that point, the 3 men asserted their freedom and opened a business together. But when the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, C.S. Perkins demanded that the men be arrested and turned over to him as slaves. He granted Albert G. Perkins of Sacramento, presumably a relative, his power of attorney to act in his place and have these 3 individuals sent back to Mississippi. Here we can see another image. This is a certificate signed by the governor of Mississippi attesting to the legality of the power of attorney document submitted to the California authorities by Albert G. Perkins. This document is here at the State Archives. Now, after they were arrested by a sheriff, the men sought a writ of habeas corpus contending that the 1852 statute was invalid because it conflicted with the constitutional prohibition on slavery. The Supreme Court of California, however, concluded that the constitutional provision was merely discretionary and required implementing legislation to become effective. The court eventually ordered the 3 men remanded to C.S. Perkins. Now, another famous court case, here we can see an image of a brief from that court case. Another famous court case was brought by a Black woman named Mary Pleasant against the North Beach and Mission Railroad Company in 1868. This is the cover of one of the briefs in the case. On September 27, 1866, Pleasant tried to hail a streetcar in San Francisco. Refusing to stop and let her board, the conductor reportedly said, quote, we don't take colored people in the cars, unquote. So less than a year after the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was adopted to abolish slavery, one of California's first civil rights pioneers began a legal odyssey that would eventually come before the state's Supreme Court. Pleasant successfully sued the streetcar company for damages, and the case outlawed segregation in the city's public transit system. Now, in about the year 1940, many of our Supreme and Appellate case files were indexed by the federally funded Northern California Historical Records Survey, and these indexes are called the WPA indexes. And these case files are indexed by both plaintiff and defendant's names. Here we can see an image of one of the WPA indexes for our Supreme Court records. The appellate WPA index consists of 6 large bound volumes and describes civil and criminal case files created by both the First and Third Appellate District Courts. At that time, the California Courts of Appeal was divided into 3 geographic regions. These days, there's 6. Now, the dates of these case files span 1905 to 1935, but the bulk of the case files described date from 1905 to about 1924. Here we can see an image of one of the pages from a WPA index. Now, for case files that post-date the WPA indexes, we typically request that the researcher provide us with either the case file number, or sometimes that's called the docket number, that the court assigns to that particular case. If the researcher doesn't know the case file number, but if the opinion of the justices if it had a published opinion, sometimes that case file number can be found by searching different legal databases like LexisNexis, that kind of thing.